Uh, we are only 5 minutes left from the program, from the scheduled program at 6:30. Thank you, Ahona, for presenting this poster here. Ma'am, am I audible and visible to others? Madam? Ahona, am I visible and audible?
Yes, Momit, absolutely.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much. There are very few minutes before us.
Momita, you can go ahead.
Okay, ma'am. Since Sarah is waiting, so I can start now. It is only 6:26.
Okay,
There are only 4 minutes. So Sarah is here, so we can start now, I think. And there are almost 59 participants here. So I think we can start.
1 minute on, some kind of echo is coming.
Ma'am, is it from me?
Yes, it's from me because I'm presenting from a different account and I'm operating from a different one. So that's why it's creating a problem. I suppose the moment you start the moment you start coordinating, you start introducing stuff, I think I'll just stop presenting. That can reduce the problem.
Okay, so the recording is being started.
Yeah, I think I should stop.
I think the recording has started. Recording has started, I think. Has it been, Ahona?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So, may I start, madam? It is 6:28 and Sarah is waiting here.
You start, Momita.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. With the permission of our HOD, I am starting this session. A very good evening to all the participants present here. On behalf of the Department of English, Chakdaha College, I, Momita Ghosh, cordially welcome you to the second slot of the CBCS curriculum-based web lecture series organized by the department in association with IQAC, Chakdaha College. This web lecture series is an attempt to make the curriculum more interesting to the students who are going through this lockdown situation. In this unforeseen situation, they have lost the opportunity of physically attending the classes, seminars, and workshops. With a view to this, our department has organized this web lecture series to open a scope of enrichment and learning to the students. Here, I'd like to thank our Honorable Principal Madam, Dr. Swagata Das Mahanto, who has given us the permission to arrange such a program. She has always been encouraging us for arranging various types of seminars, workshops, interactive sessions for the students. She has also encouraged us to organize different types of webinars as well. I would also like to thank Dr. Arun Kumar Nondi, IQAC coordinator, and the head Department of Economics, Chakdaha College, who has always been a supporting guide and has always been encouraging for various techniques of teaching and learning. Finally, I would also like to thank our HOD, the HOD of our department, Madhumita Das Madam, and other faculty members, Zakia Kalam, Abhishek Choudhury, Ahona Bhattacharya, Nobonita Paul, and Obhijit Bishwas. Without their cooperation, this session would not have been possible. I also welcome the students of our college and other colleges as well who have eagerly participated in this event. Now, I would like to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Bipranarayan Bhattacharya. We are very glad to have our guest here. Here I would like to say a few words to introduce Dr. Bhattacharya. Dr. Bipranarayan Bhattacharya is an assistant professor in the Department of English, Government General Degree College, Kharagpur 2. He has completed his PhD on late Victorian popular fiction from the Department of English, Kazi Nazrul University, Asansol, and his MA from University of Hyderabad. He has previously taught in various reputed institutions such as Kazi Nazrul University, Scottish Church College, and the Heritage College. His areas of interest include Victorian studies, children's literature, and popular culture. The title of his today's lecture is Reading Victorian Society in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. Sir, I cordially welcome you to this session. Please take over the session. And sir, one information to our students that please turn off your video and audio for the smooth functioning of our session. Sir, please take over. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Very big thank you to everybody, and good afternoon, good evening. Yeah, it's quite late. Good evening, and thank you all for letting me be part of this wonderful drive. As you can see in the poster, the lecture is titled Reading Victorian Society in Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. And before I begin, I think there is something which I need to say is that one thing which I would like to do in course of my lecture is that I would try to prove that this course popular literature, which of course brings up various popular texts which you people, I mean the students here, they are actually the ones whom the lecture is primarily targeted to, I believe. You have come across during your childhood or in your boyhood and girlhood days, but what we would like to prove here, and what we will hopefully see in course of this lecture, is that even these popular texts, which we have treated as somewhat of a light reading during the time we were first reading them, these also present very serious thought material, and I have somehow always believed that these are actually the texts which perhaps we should look upon with a renewed curiosity and attention, because these are always very deceptively easy. They say a lot of important things in a very entertaining manner, and it's perhaps because they are so entertaining that we somehow underestimate the complexity which each of these texts have. So I hope this lecture will go to some extent to prove this. And let's begin without much ado. When Carroll's Through the Looking Glass first came out, of course, as you people know, it's a sequel to his very popular novella, I must say. It's quite short, Alice in Wonderland. And when it actually came out, Through the Looking Glass, the critics, they were almost unanimous on one point. That is, they were saying that, well, this, in spite of being quite a decent book, is not as good as the previous one. I mean, Wonderland was better. I mean, if there was one point in which all the critics were agreeing about, it was this, that Wonderland was better, and Through the Looking Glass is actually of an inferior quality. If you read accounts about the contemporary reviews of the book, which you will find, I mean, you will find the accounts by Elizabeth A. Cripps, and then there's Harold Bloom, of course, who's writing about all those reviews. All of them are unanimous on this point that, yeah, when this book came out, the critics were pretty cruel in greeting it. And they were always saying that, yeah, this is a decent book, but not as good as the previous one. And one of the main complaints which they had against the book was that it was too complicated, and it did not have that funny quality which Alice in Wonderland had. It is more complicated. It is more, let's say, mechanical. And that was why perhaps there was one critic who mentioned that this book seemed to be more of Dodson, the mathematician's work, than Carroll, the fantasy writer's work. As you know, Charles Ludwig Dodson is actually the name of Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll is, of course, his pen name. And he was a logician and mathematician at Oxford. So that was what they were saying, that this book is perhaps too complicated for being a children's book. And now, what was the reason behind it? What I personally feel is that the reason behind the critics branding it unanimously as very complex and somewhat unfit to be a children's book is perhaps that Carroll's social criticism in Through the Looking Glass was much more, let's say, wholesome and much more layered than in the previous book. When I read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland or Alice in Wonderland, let's say, what I always feel is that there is, of course, a lot of social criticism in Wonderland as well. I mean, Wonderland is Victorian England. But what Carroll was doing there, it was perhaps because it was his first attempt at such kind of a thing, he took up some specific aspects of the Victorian society, let's say aspects which more directly relate to the child's world, and he limited himself to addressing those aspects only. It was not that he was taking up multiple aspects at a time and addressing them one after another, which was actually the thing that he was doing in Through the Looking Glass. And that is why when Madhumita ma'am asked me to choose the specific topic on which I would like to give a lecture on, I was almost, I was almost ready with my answer that can it be something on the way he reads Victorian society, because that is somewhat which I have, that is something which I have always felt while reading Through the Looking Glass. In Through the Looking Glass, the social criticism of Carroll is much more complicated. And what he's trying to do here is that he has come out of those limitations, which he was somewhat limiting himself to in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And he has said to himself that, okay, this time I'm going to address almost every aspect of the Victorian society that's possible. I mean, almost everything that the Victorian people are talking about during this specific period, I will try to give a hint of that in this novel. And that is perhaps the reason why people found it a bit too baffling to be a children's book. It's actually very much complicated. And there are places where you think that the text is becoming too dense. And that is precisely the reason. He's taking up too many issues at a time. And let alone taking up too many issues, he's also treating them through various angles. So that's making it even more complicated, let's say. So how is he actually doing it? To begin at the beginning, then, we must remember that the time which Carroll is talking about in this book, Through the Looking Glass, is Victorian England in the 1830s and 40s. And you people must have some idea about the Victorian period per se. You must have had some introductory reading on this period. Now, Victorian England during the 1830s and 40s, that is the early part of the Victorian period, let's say. If there was one thing which was perhaps the most important during this period, it was reform. I mean, when you read a book such as Patrick Brantlinger's book on England of this period, I mean, he has two books on Victorian England. One is during the one is written on the first part, which is named The Age of Reform, and he has another one which he himself says that I was planning to name it The Age of Empire, but then I thought it would be too mainstream, so he named it The Rule of Darkness, British imperialism and empire from 1850s to 1920s. So during the first period of the Victorian period, there was one thing which was very much happening. It is reform. The people were, let's say, obsessed about reformatory measures, and they was at least the intellectuals, they were firm believers in something called progress. There were a lot of parliamentary debates about what should be done, and they were bringing out one act after another. And if you look at our country during this period, the first half of the 19th century, let's say, you can see the effect of this kind of a mentality in our country as well. I mean, almost all the important reforms which we were having during the Bengal Renaissance, these were happening during this period, right? The Hindu college gets established, and then there is that Occidentalist Orientalist debate, and then there is that Macaulay's minute, the famous thing, and Ram Mohan's letter to Amherst, and the bringing up of one university after another, and then comes the Sepoy Mutiny, of course, and that gives them a kind of a drawback, and they start revisioning their strategy. There is a lot of debate in their parliament as to why the September mutiny had broken out, and they come to the conclusion that, well, we may have brought in too many reforms, and that might have pissed off the Indian people. So it was this reform which was, of course, happening very much in their own country as well. There were so many acts coming out. There was the act to abolish slavery, which came out in 1833. Then there was a Poor Law, which is being taken up in Dickens's Oliver Twist. Then there is the First Factory Act. Then the consecutive Factory Acts. Then the act which abolished child labor, and all of them. So if you look at England during this period, it's a time of change. It's a time of flux. It's a time of course, great excitement, because this is the time when the liberals were going big, right? Gladstone was having a lot of support, and the intellectuals who were almost to a T of a liberal mindset, they believed very much in this idea of progress, and they had a strong confidence in the things which they were doing. And they firmly believed that England is becoming better and better. And they saw English progress in terms of a straight line. It seemed to be, let's say, a unidirectional journey. England will go from strength to strength till it becomes the best nation in the world. I mean, that is why there is so much optimism in the air when you find someone like Cecil Rhodes saying that I will paint the whole world red. I mean, such, let's say, such overconfidence. He really believes, this guy, he must have gone out of his mind, right? He believes that the British Empire will one day cover the whole world. God help his brains, let's say. So it is this society, and it's also a society bound by a lot of rules, of course. A lot of rules because when you see the liberals doing things, you find that they always believe in firm discipline and let's say a tempered life. This is a middle class outlook, which is of course becoming the norm of the Victorian life. When you see Victorian England, is the liberals and the middle classes were ruling the day. So it is this kind of a society in which Alice herself is living in, and this is where we will actually make way to the text itself. When you find Alice at the beginning of the novel, what do you see? She's playing with her kittens, and she's sitting down all by herself. And what is the nature of the play? What is she trying to do there? She's trying to dominate the kittens. So the very first idea which you get here is that why is she doing it? I mean, why is she choosing such kind of a game? Well, it's precisely because these are the things which actually happens to her. She's trying to dominate the kittens because people throughout the day try to dominate Alice herself, all the adults, because she is a child and also because she is a girl. She has to live under a lot of discipline. And this is where I think I should say a thing or two about the idea of childhood itself, which kind of underwent a change during the Enlightenment. I mean, you see, when it was a medieval period, the idea of a child is that there was the way we see now the child being treated as a separate entity from an adult, right? That is a normalized way of seeing things. We always believe in this idea still now that the child is something essentially different from the adult, and this is something which our culture has normalized so much that anywhere you go you see separate sections named away for children. I mean, you go to a clothing store, you see there is a children's department or the children's section, which is generally kept at a separate corner. You go to a bookstore, you find there is a separate corner named children's books. You have movies being rated as U and R and X and God knows what else. U means those are the things which children can watch. I mean, and then there is something called UR, which I guess is children need parental guidance to watch those movies, such and such. So this very idea that the child is a separate entity, this is something which was not known during the medieval period. I mean, if you read Philip Parry's book on the ideas of childhood, you will see that the child was treated as just a smaller version of the adult. And if you look at the kind of clothing made for the children of Europe during that period, the child's cloth was exactly a smaller version of the adult's cloth. So it was very much obvious that the child is not treated as a separate entity. It's just treated as a smaller adult. And this kind of an idea was reflected in the way it was treated as well, because they believed, people believed that the child carries in it the germ of evil. I mean, as unbelievable as it may sound now, and that was how it was during that period, because people believed that, I mean, at least the Christians in Europe, they believed that since the children, I mean, all the human, they are the children of Adam and Eve, they carry in them from the birth itself, they carry in them the seed of the original sin. And as a result, all the children, they have a tendency to go bad by themselves because of this seed of the original sin in them. And it is this, and this is the reason why they should always be dealt with a heavy hand, right from where they have dropped from their mother's belly. They need to be dealt with a heavy hand, otherwise they will turn bad. I mean, what we call in Bengali, boke jabe or uchchane jabe. And people believe that children always have a tendency to do that. And that is why during the medieval period, the kind of education they were given and the kind of training they were given, it was very hard and it was very penalizing, let's say. It was very cruel in a sense. Those kind of capital punishments, I mean, now children can never imagine. I mean, it's almost unthinkable. I mean, there are some examples in the Victorian period as well. There was a kind of, let's say, hangover of that practice during the Victorian period as well. There were, let's say, some sections of the society who believed still that children should be dealt with a heavy hand. And if you look at those altruisms, those sayings like spare the rod and spoil the child, if you do a research about which time this saying came popular, I mean, you will find that this saying became popular during the medieval period. I mean, if you read that novel Jane Eyre, and when Jane is sent to that school, Lowood and that man, Mr. Brocklehurst, they are the people who I mean, Lowood is a kind of transitional phase. Mr. Brocklehurst is a man who believes still in that medieval idea of the child as a little evil, who should be a little devil, let's say, who should be dealt with a heavy hand. But in Lowood, we already see new ideas of childhood creeping in. Now, where did that new idea actually come? When did it actually come? It came during the Enlightenment. Why? There was one people responsible for it. I mean, this whole change in attitude came from John Locke's idea. I mean, when John Locke was writing that essay on human understanding, when he said that the human mind is a tabula rasa, it's a blank plate, he said something revolutionary, because it actually meant that if your mind is a blank slate, you will you do not have any seeds or any thoughts in your mind when you are born. So obviously you will not have the seed of original sin in you. What he was actually saying by saying that the human mind is a blank slate when it's born is that the human mind does not carry, I mean, this was one of the implications of his theory. He was also, what he said also meant that the child is not carrying that seed of original sin when it's born. Locke's idea went diametrically opposite to the idea of the child being a little devil. And from that time onwards, the child came to be seen in a different way. I mean, you can, from then came this idea that, well, if the child has nothing in his or her mind, if his or her mind is a blank slate, then what is the child? It's innocent. I mean, what is the idea of innocence? The idea of purity. The idea of innocence or purity is precisely this absence of knowledge, absence of any kind of knowledge, good or bad. You do not know absolutely anything. That's why you are pure, right? And this is where the trend started of looking upon the child as essentially pure, as essentially, let's say, blank, innocent, pure. It gets started from the Enlightenment period. And then you have William Godwin, who's writing his tract on education, where he is all the more emphasizing on education, because he's saying that, look, we have been wrong all along. The child is not evil. The child actually knows nothing. And if a child goes evil, the responsibility, let's say, lies on the tutor, not on the child. The child will become as it learns. And that is why education becomes all the more important. And when you are teaching a child, you should always be patient with the child. You should always, through your own temperate behavior, establish a good example before the child, which the child can emulate. And when, let's say, Godwin's daughter is writing that novel, Frankenstein, when Victor Frankenstein is telling the story of his childhood, what is he saying? He's saying that, think about the early stages of the book when he is telling his story to the sailor, Robert Walton. He's saying that I am very lucky to have gotten parents like these. My parents were intellectuals, and that is why they knew the recent theories about education which were doing rounds during that period. And that is why when they taught me, they never hit me. They never even scolded me. My memories of childhood education are so flowery, so pleasant. While other of my friends were not so lucky, because unfortunately, I mean, what Victor is unabashedly saying here is that my friends' parents suck. They were not as smart as my own parents. They didn't know as much, and that is why they were still beating all those poor friends. They were beating them black and blue while educating them. But my parents, they were smart, they were intellectuals, so they knew this new ideas of education and child rearing, let's say. And eventually it is this idea of this romantic idea of child, which slowly starts becoming the norm during the Romantic period. You see William Blake using this idea in his book Songs of Innocence, where he is also showing the child in a very, let's say, delicate manner. He is comparing the child to a lamb. In the poem Lamb, of course, I mean, I guess you people have it in your graduation syllabus. Lamb and tiger, they're everywhere in the graduation syllabus. And that is why the child is being compared to a lamb, and the child is being compared to Jesus Christ and whatnot. And then you have William Wordsworth writing the Immortality Ode, where he is saying that when I was born, I had those trailing clouds of glory. I was so pure, and now I have gone bad. So I'm so sorry. I have grown up, and I have become a bad man. I was not a bad man. I was so good when I was a child. And then you find our own Rabindranath Tagore and Abanindranath. They are using this idea of the innocent child in their own books. Charles Dickens is also using it during this period in his books. Jane Eyre, of course, is a bit complicated, but still, I mean, if you read Charlotte Bronte's book, you will see that the girl Jane, she's pretty innocent, and there is a kind of an air of purity all around her. And of course, there is an air of purity around all of Dickens's children, because this is the idea which he is also following, this romantic idea of childhood. Oliver Twist, he is so innocent, my God. He goes into a den full of trainee pickpockets. And even after seeing all those, let's say, those wallets, he cannot understand that he is actually inside the den of pickpockets. He is so dumb, let's say. He is almost as dumb as a Thompson in Tintin. And it's this same kind of idea of the innocent child which also, I mean, Rabindranath is making use in his book Shishu and Shishu Bholanath. And of course, Abanindranath is also using this idea in his book Budo Angla and Nalok and all those books, right? So this was the idea, but you should also remember that not everyone was following this new idea of child rearing. I mean, in the Victorian society at least, there was still people sticking to the old rule of dominating the child, and that was also because the Victorian society itself was ruled by so many disciplinary measures. People by nature were dominating during the Victorian period, let's say. They were very conservative, and there were a lot of rules everywhere, and why should a child be an exception to this kind of atmosphere? So Alice, she is dominating the kittens precisely because she lives in a dominating atmosphere. Every one of the adults try to dominate her. And there is also something significant, is that Alice, she is not accusing the white kitten, she is accusing the black one. Racism much. If you read the first lines, they themselves say, one thing was sure, the white kitten could not have done it. So it is obviously the black kitten who has done it. I mean, this sounds pretty similar to the George Floyd incident, right? I mean, since George Floyd is black, he must be the culprit. So this is perhaps how Carroll was taking up the problem of racism in Victorian society, and how the color black itself gets identified with something evil in a child's mind. albeit in a very playful manner. And there is also a kind of, let's say, inequality in the treatment of the two kittens. You will see that the white kitten has a special name, Snowdrop, while the black kitten is named only Kitty. No special name for her. But anyway, you will see that although Alice is subjected to so much oppression and dominating nature, there is also a strain in her character, and this is what we will see Carol actually works with during the later periods of the novel. She also has a kind of escapist mentality in her. She's always, there is a part of her which is always yearning to escape from these surroundings, and it gets revealed as early as, let's say, when Carol says that her favorite game is Let's Pretend. I mean, Let's Pretend is actually, pretension gives you a kind of release from reality, right? Why do you pretend to be somebody else? It's because you are not happy with your reality. And what are the things which she wants to be while pretending? And the very first thing which she tries to be is when she shouts into the ear of a nurse, I want to be a hungry hyena. So where does the idea of hyena come? I mean, this is the time, the Victorian period, when the English are actually making colonial inroads in Africa, right? So this is the time when all the stories of those African adventures, they have started pouring in from the 18th century itself. Frederick Marryat and all the other early writers of the adventure fiction. They are writing about all those animals found in Africa, the hyenas, the cheetahs, let's say, and the elephants. So she's taking pretty much a big leap here from England to Africa through her imagination. And then, of course, she wonders about what's on the other side of the looking glass. I mean, this is the time when we become sure that she is very fond of making things up. And of course, looking onto the other side of the looking glass and wondering whether there is another world behind the looking glass, it's quite a popular game of children. I personally seen quite a lot of kids taking interest in playing such a game. So when she actually goes into the looking glass land, you find that she tries to penetrate the glass and she succeeds in doing it. And in one moment, she's on the other side of the looking glass. When she actually goes there, what happens? You will see that just like in Alice in Wonderland, when Alice goes to any new land, she tries to behave in the way she has been taught to by her parents and all. And this is also something which is very characteristic, because when a child goes to a new place, you will see that the child is always on her guard or his guard, and the child will always behave in the way the parents have told him or her to. It is only by and by when the child starts coming out of its shell and expresses its, let's say, individuality. So the same thing happens with Alice as well. When she goes into Wonderland, you will always see her trying to exercise everything she has learned in her books. She uses big words like latitudes and longitudes, because those are the words which she is reading. But unfortunately, in Alice in Wonderland, all her book knowledge comes to no use. They do not help her in any way. And of course, the same thing happens here as well. When she goes into the looking glass land, she tries to be of use. Now, trying to make oneself useful is something which forms a very important part in women's education in the Victorian period. Since the Victorian period was very patriarchal, I mean, so people were always saying things like, a woman should be extremely selfless, a woman should always try to make herself useful, a woman should always try to be of service to other people. A woman should stop worrying about her own desires, her own thoughts, her own demands, let's say. It was almost a sin to worry about them. And she should always try to serve others as much as possible. And you will see that that is the first thing which Alice tries to do when she steps into the looking glass land. She sees the chess pieces moving about and she tries to help them. She tries to be of use. When she sees the little red king and red queen going around, she tries to pick them and place them on the table. But what happens is that she actually ends up making things even worse, because those people unfortunately do not understand that she's trying to help them. They go into such a fright, and it almost looks, I mean, it's so comic. Alice trying to be of use and screwing things up even more. After that, right after that, helping those chess pieces comes the Jabberwocky poem. But the Jabberwocky poem is actually something which we will leave for the time being. We will come to it later. We will come to it at the last part of our lecture. What she does after that is that she has a panoramic view of the Looking Glass land, and there is an illustration of Sir John Tenniel in the original book, where you see the Looking Glass land is divided into various plots. And this is where we start realizing that Carroll actually intends the Looking Glass land to be an allegory of contemporary Victorian society, because like the Victorian society, the whole of Looking Glass land is neatly categorized into different squares. And it's of course because I mean the ready reason is because the whole of Looking Glass land is divided into a chessboard, and that is why it's checkered. It's divided into differently colored squares. But I mean, it actually is shaped like this because Carroll wants to present it as a parallel to the Victorian society, which is neatly categorized into different sections. I mean, there are the differentiations of race, class, gender, and whatnot. And this is the thing which becomes even more obvious when Alice goes and meets the flowers, the talking flowers. The flowers, of course, present a section of this categorized Victorian society. Because if you see the flowers, they are first of all dominating, which of course, which is almost everyone in Looking Glass land. They are so dominating towards Alice, which is perhaps because Carroll is trying to show us how dominating the Victorian society itself is, how stifling it is to people's individuality. This is a society where people always try to take an upper hand on you, all the more so if you are a child, let's say. So they are pretty rude, dominating. They call Alice stupid. They say that we thought you cannot think at all. And you will see that the flowers, the way they talk, it's obvious that they are differentiated into various classes. There are flowers like the rose and the tiger lily, who of course belong to the upper class because of the way they talk. They talk in a very condescending manner. And there are the daisies. The daisies, they are treated exactly as the lower classes, because the things that are said about the daisies, these are exactly the things which the upper classes told about the working classes. The daisies are called ignorant, illogical, childish, because it is said that when they talk all in a bunch, nothing can be heard. They are so immature, they can never talk, they always quarrel. And these are exactly the things which the upper classes were saying about the working classes. I mean, you read Matthew Arnold's Culture and Anarchy. This is what he says about the working classes, right? He says that everyone says that the working class should be given vote, but we should ask, are the rabble really ready to have voting rights? Because there is only one thing which the working classes know, and it is create problems, quarrel. Because they lack proper education, they are not really ready to behave in a, let's say, gentle enough manner. So it cannot be said that they are ready to be given voting rights and all. So that's exactly the way the daisies are being treated here. They are being treated as childish, quarrelsome, immature. And then Alice comes to the Red Queen. She meets the Red Queen, and the Red Queen is, of course, the most explicit figure of authority. She represents Victoria herself, maybe. She's so dominating, and then comes the period when Alice is told to run by the Red Queen. Both of them are running, and ultimately Alice finds that after a period of time, after they stop running, they have actually reached nowhere. It's a very funny part where Alice exerts herself as much as she can, but she finds out that in mathematical terms, her displacement has been 0. She's standing at the same space. This is a portion which satirizes the Victorian hullabaloo with progress. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the Victorians, they were staunch believers in the idea that they were very hardworking people, and the Victorians were, of course, they were hardworking people, but what I am trying to say here is that they were very self-satisfied with this idea that we are hardworking people and we are always working towards our betterment. I mean, if you read the, let's say, autobiographies of Victorians, I mean, people like David Livingstone, you will see, my God, how self-obsessed these people are. I mean, what kind of, I mean, their self-confidence is almost comical. They believe that they are special people. They believe that they have a lot of energy and they are working their heart out, and everything they are doing is right. It is sanctioned by God himself. I don't know how they got this crazy idea in their mind, but they are so confident that whatever they are doing, it just cannot be wrong. And I mean, they are doing all sorts of good things during this period, and England is shortly going to be the best thing the world has ever seen. It is going to be greater than the Roman Empire. It is going to be greater than the Greek Empire. It is going to be greater than anything. I mean, this is the thing which Carroll has perhaps mocked, because maybe he was asking, is all this work, is all this progress, this reform, let's say, all these new acts, are they ultimately going anywhere? Are all these reforms ultimately giving us any real gain? This is the same question which you find asked in the industrial novels, right? There are a lot of Victorian novelists who are talking about the same problem. They are doing the same thing. They are questioning this idea of progress itself. Are we actually progressing? There is that novel, Charles Dickens's Hard Times, where he keeps on hammering this question. All these utilitarian ideas, all these rational ideas, these big talks about new education system, cramming people's minds with facts and making them better people. And you will see Thomas Gradgrind, he suffers from exactly the same problem, excessive self-confidence. His self-belief is almost comical. He never listens to anybody, and he believes so much that he is right. He ends up destroying the lives of his own children, let's say. He's so overbearing. But we find that all his efforts ultimately come to nothing during the later part of the novel. So maybe this is exactly the same question that Carroll is also asking. Are we actually going anywhere? No, because Alice finds that all her activity, all her running has actually taken her nowhere. She is exactly at the same point as she was before. And then, of course, the rail station. Alice comes to the rail station, and of course, the rail station is perhaps, railways and rail station is perhaps something which features in almost every Victorian novel. How can it not be? Because the Victorian period itself was made on railways, let's say. Any good thing during that period, any mentionable thing, it was done because of the railways. The railways almost revolutionized England during that period. I mean, people say that it might have well be the most important invention during that period. I mean, like printing made Elizabethan England, printing made Elizabethan Renaissance possible. Railways itself made Victorian England possible, because the railways made industrialization possible, and anything Victorian, the railways had something to do with it. During the Victorian time, you find cricket getting popular, and of course, who was the most famous cricketer during that period? W.G. Grace, the father of cricket. And how did he become so famous? It was because he was traveling from one county to another, let's say, and there is that maddening record of his scoring almost 1,000 runs in 3 days. How could he do that? He could do that because he was traveling by the railways. He played 3 matches in 3 days, and he went on scoring triple hundreds in all 3 of them. And then, of course, in literature, you find the railways everywhere. You find it in Dickens, you find in novels like Hard Times, let's say Great Expectations, Bleak House, and then you find it, of course, in the Sherlock Holmes novels of Arthur Conan Doyle. Whenever Holmes leaves London and goes to any county to solve any murders, he takes the railways. You find the railways in Bram Stoker's Dracula. You find it everywhere. So it's only very normal that you find the railways in Alice, and it is the rail station that Carroll chooses to show the commercialization that was happening during this period. I mean, of course, this is a period when commerce was making great progresses, right? You find English economy going to an excessive strength during this period. Revenues were pouring in. Commerce was making its presence felt in almost all the major continents, and by commerce I mean British commerce. It was doing wonders in India, it was doing wonders in Africa, it was doing wonders. Well, America had gone out of their hands, but commerce was still going strong with their partnership, and things were pouring in from every corner of the world. If you see if you read the Victorian novels, another thing which you will find there is the drawing room descriptions. There are a lot of critical works which are being done now regarding the material culture during in the Victorian period. If you read Victorian novels, the sheer abundance of things, it's mind-boggling. You will see there are pages and pages of description which shows nothing but the description of all the things that are there in Victorian drawing rooms. You find it in Jane Eyre, description of the drawing room of let's say Thornfield Hall. You find it in Dracula, description of Jonathan's house, of Dracula's house, of course. You find it in Dickens, you find it in Doyle, you find it in Thackeray, you find it in any major or minor Victorian novelist. And what does that tendency imply? It simply implies that this was the time when a lot of things could be bought in England. There were a lot of things which were subject to buying. If you had money enough, you could almost cram your drawing rooms with things. Think about the drawing room of Mr. Sholto in the Sherlock Holmes novel, The Sign of the Four. There are so many things in his drawing room. Things from faraway India, tiger skin rugs, Turkish carpets, Ottoman chairs. All of these things could be bought if you only had money enough, because money, and this was perhaps the first time when the English people, let's say Europe itself, had started realizing that money can buy almost anything, and almost anything can be had if you were lucky enough to be born in Victorian England. So this is this commercialization that is being mocked in this rail station episode, because what do you see those people saying? Everything is measured in terms of money to a ridiculous extent. Time is said to be worth this and this £1,000, and the smoke of the train is said to be worth this and this pounds, and then you have tickets of human size. What is being shown here? This importance given to material things, given to non-living objects, this material culture which is becoming so important to the Victorians, it is precisely this which is being mocked here. It is almost like the ticket itself is overwhelming, overshadowing the human who is taking the train. The value of the ticket is more than the human who is buying the ticket. You read Matthew Arnold's Culture and Anarchy, this is actually what he is trying to say. This is actually what he is speaking against. This excessive value which we put to things, he is revolting against. And I mean, of course, later, I mean, then you have Tennyson's Ulysses. Why does Ulysses hate the Ithacans? And when you read Ulysses, you find that who are the Ithacans? The Ithacans are actually the Victorians. What is Ithaca? Ithaca is actually Victorian England. And Ulysses is a very disgruntled old man who does not like these Victorian people. What does Ulysses say? They hoard, they eat, they sleep, and know not me. Even before eating and sleeping, what do? They hoard. Hoard means acquiring things, material culture. This is something Ulysses hates. They value things more than people themselves. And why? Because they don't value Ulysses. A man like Ulysses, they don't value enough. If people start valuing things more than a man like Ulysses, it's obvious how obsessed people have become with material culture. So this is precisely this obsession with material culture which we see here. When we see that in the rail station, tickets are being given of human size. And then, of course, Alice In the train, also everyone tries to dominate Alice. I mean, this happens almost everywhere throughout the novel. Everyone tries to dominate Alice. 90% of the people and the animals, anthropomorphized animals, let's say animals with human characteristics. And then Alice gets down from the train, and then that small insect talks about the diet of the different insects. And this is where you actually see Carol addressing the issue of food and the Victorian period. Now, why is food so important? Because there was a food shortage during the 1830s and the 40s. And it is this differential treatment of people in the face of hunger which is being shown here. Because you see the various insects which are actually tantamount to the various classes of the Victorian society. You see the snapdragon fly, who is of course the upper class, because the snapdragon fly survives on the diet is composed of frumenty and mince pie. So it's almost a kind of, let's say, a CCD Pizza Hut KFC diet, right? The snapdragon fly has all the good things in the world because it belongs to the upper class. Food shortage or no food shortage, it will always receive ample food. And then comes a rocking horse fly. Now, what is said about the rocking horse fly? It goes from one branch to the another. So it's in a state of flux. It represents the middle class, who were always in a state of flux during the Victorian society because they were making their own let's say their own fate. They were trying to get more and more power during this period. And then come the bread and butterfly, who are of course the working classes, because their diet is perhaps the worst. Weak tea with cream, and when they do not get it, they die. Because they are the working classes, no one really worry about them. If you read the industrial novels, you will see no one worries about Stephen Blackpool and Rachel in hard times. And I mean, all through the novel, you will find that Alice is always in a state of constant confusion. Everyone is pushing her from one corner to the other, and there is always this atmosphere of a great hullabaloo, which I have already said. People are always in a hurry, and Alice is so bewildered. Now, what does that actually signify? Alice here is seen as a Victorian common man, who is of course a bit bewildered because there were a lot of new things coming during the Victorian period. All the old ideas were getting changed, and the existing ideas about religion, science, and politics, economy, philosophy, all those were getting challenged. And this is the period, let's say, this is the period when the new scientific theories were coming in. By the time Alice through the looking glass is getting read, Lyell's theory has of course come out. Charles Edward Lyell, who claimed that the Bible is actually joking with us. The world is much older than the Bible claims, and God did not actually create the world in 6 days and then took rest on the seventh day, Sunday. The world got built in various stages, and life did not come once. I mean, it was not like God said, let there be light and let there be a tiger and let there be a lion. It was not so easy. Life came through various transformations, and of course this life came one after another. There was the spark of life, and then the life got extinct, and then again life came, and it went like this. And that is what Lyell says has created the fossils. And then of course came Charles Darwin, who dealt an even more let's say telling blow when he said that the humans have actually come from monkeys. According to the Bible, the human is actually the son of God, right? And now comes a bearded fellow who claims that the humans are actually children of monkeys. So a pretty big blow to take in, to swallow, let's say. So then you have something called the crisis of faith, which is there, which is shown very much in that poem, that Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach, where you see the same idea of confusion. Where he says that ignorant armies killing themselves by night and all those lines. It actually refers to that Victorian man's confusion. You read Tennyson's In Memoriam, you will find the same doubt in that poem as well. And this is the same doubt which is getting revealed in Alice as well, the same doubt and confusion. Alice cannot really grasp all the things that is happening all around her, because so many things are happening around her, precisely like the Victorian common man, who was seeing all these things happening around him or her, and he was actually feeling a bit lost. He was still trying to grasp things. Like you see old people struggling with smartphones, trying to understand all the new features. That was precisely how, let's say, the Victorian common man was feeling. And that is exactly how Alice is also feeling in this novel. Then, of course, she goes to that forest where again Lewis Carroll is playing with the idea of identity, where Alice makes friends with a deer, with a small deer cub, and as soon as the deer, because Alice forgets her own identity, and of course the small deer has also forgotten her own identity, it becomes very easy for them to become friends. As soon as they remember their identities after coming out of that magical forest, the deer runs away from Alice, in spite of the fact that she had nothing to fear from Alice. This is actually some Carol trying to tell us that sometimes our identities become our enemies. It is only if we did not treat people with such preconceived ideas, we could make friends with them very easily. The idea of the other itself is actually something which is being given to us from the outside, and I mean it's very significant because Victorian England was very much discovering the idea of the other, because this London was the commercial capital of the world, and people from all nationalities were pouring in England during that time. There were the Lascars from Malay, Asia, and there were of course the coolies, the Indian servants, people from Africa, the slaves, the freed slaves, and then of course people from, let's say, the Armenians, people from South America bringing in the goods from those places. So the idea of the other was very much there in Victorian England, and this is why you find you find a man like Lewis Carroll showing how the idea of other is actually a preconceived one. If we only forget the fact that the African is different from us, that this person is not actually a person from another land, we can perhaps become friends with the person very easily. Then come the episode of Tweedledum and Tweedledee, and this is where perhaps Carroll is talking about the political leader, because the fact with Tweedledum and Tweedledee is that they are precisely the same, right? They look the same, and it is only because they write D and dum on their shirt collars that they insist that they are different. But we actually know better. From the illustration and all, we see that they are actually the same. There is nothing to differentiate between them. And their fight is a paper knight one. And the fight is something decorative. It's nothing very serious. It's almost a made up one. They have preconceived time and etiquette about fighting. So it's very obvious that the fight is not a very serious one. Otherwise, it would not have been so much decorative. They actually have nothing important to fight about. They fight only because they want us to believe that they quarrel. Who are Tweedledum and Tweedledee? If you look about if you examine the poem which they tell Alice, it becomes very obvious who are Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Tweedledum and Tweedledee are political leaders, because the poem they tell Alice is actually about political leaders. The walrus and the carpenter, they are actually Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone. And this becomes very much obvious if you take a look at the illustration of Sir John Tenniel. If you see the illustration, yeah, here you go. You see the walrus, it has Disraeli's mustache, and it is very neatly dressed up like Disraeli. And then you have the carpenter. The carpenter has Gladstone's square jaw, and it is so untidily dressed like William Gladstone. Tenniel was intentionally drawing them like this. He wanted people to compare these two figures with the two political leaders. And what happens? Both these, walrus and the carpenter, they cheat the oysters, who are of course the common people, and they eat them up. Of course, the walrus uses sweet words, and that is why Alice comes to the conclusion that perhaps the walrus is the better one than the carpenter. But then Tweedledum and Tweedledee say the walrus ate more, so perhaps the walrus is worse. What Carroll is actually trying to say here is that he's perhaps commenting on the two most important political parties during the Victorian period, the Liberals and the Conservatives. The leader of the Liberals was Gladstone, and the leader of the Conservatives was Disraeli. And what Carroll precisely wants to say here is that both these parties are the same. However much they may emphasize their difference. It's just a show, like Tweedledum and Tweedledee writing D and Dum on their shirt collars. They are exactly the same because they both feed on the common people, that is the oysters. And though Disraeli, though one of them may be more soft spoken, he is actually the greater cheater because he is actually the one who deprives common people all the more. The one who actually talks less is the one who actually oppresses less. The one who talks more is the bigger oppressor. Well, let me not go into any contemporary political issues and stuff, and let us limit ourselves to Victorian politics. So yeah, that's that. So Walrus, the carpenter, Tweedledum Tweedledee, then come the White Queen. And the White Queen is not as bad as the Red Queen. You will see that she is actually less dominating, but she says some things which are very significant, which actually tells a thing or two about the Victorian political, the Victorian judiciary, Victorian political system and stuff. When she talks about those reverse rules, where people are punished first and then they are charged, then a suitable charge is brought against them, and then finally they commit the crime. It's of course very comical because it's the other way around, as we know. People first commit a crime, then a charge is being brought against the person, and then finally the person is convicted. But we know that very often the case is actually how the White Queen tells it to be. People, sometimes innocent people, it happens everywhere in our country as well. The innocent people are first convicted, and then a fictitious charge is brought against the person, and then finally the person, being, let's say, having lost faith with the judiciary and all, the person finally commits a crime. So then you have movies made about criminals, so-called criminals, which pose actually this question: who has actually made this criminal? The society itself, because the society has convicted the criminal beforehand, before even the criminal was a criminal. Most of Amitabh Bachchan movies are actually built on this idea, right? Who made him a criminal? The society. Who made Vijay a criminal? The society. Because even when Vijay was an innocent child, they had him convicted. They wrote on his hand, "Mera baap chor hai." It was a fictitious charge, of course. And so in Victorian England as well, things very often happen in this way, in the way the White Queen says, in a reverse manner. Innocent people are fictitiously charged, are convicted, and then perhaps, having lost faith in the judicial system, they start committing crimes. Then again, then comes that stage where the Queen screams in anticipation of pain, when she has not even pricked herself, but she starts screaming in anticipation of the pain. This also, it might imply to sometimes the excessive security and all, which the political leaders, the important people take. Just because she's a queen, she's screaming even before she has hurt. Well, the political leaders do so, right? They take X, Y, Z, W, V level security, even when there is absolutely no danger. There was a Bollywood actress who recently did so. I'm not going into contemporary matters, so I will not elaborate on that. They sometimes misuse facilities. It becomes something like this: screaming to the top of your voice even before you have pricked herself, taking unnecessary security measures, let's say, even when there is no reason to be alert. Then comes the period of the shop, where the sheep is also dominating, and then you have the stage of the scented rushes. The scented rushes, of course, they represent the material pleasures, and the thing about the scented rushes is precisely when Alice tears them, they fade away, and this perhaps tries to prove the elusive nature of material pleasure. The more and the more you acquire, things only remain beautiful as long as you cannot get them. That is the sorry thing about a material pleasure. As soon as you get them, it starts looking not so valuable after all. That's the thing with smartphones and all, right? Your first smartphone, when you got it, it seemed so valuable. I mean, after some days, I mean, first maybe you had, I don't know, I'm very bad at these configuration and stuff. You have this iPhone 1, and then after some days, the iPhone 1 seems very valuable, and then of course, after some months, you have the iPhone 2. So you go to your parents and you say that, well, the iPhone 1 is not good enough. Now I need the iPhone 2. And then comes the iPhone 3 and 4 and 5 and whatnot. And you, being, well, what you are, you go on buying one after another, and they just keep on bringing upgraded versions. That is the thing about material pleasures. As soon as you get one, it starts seeming backdated. You start yearning after another one. As soon as you buy iPhone 50, let's say, it starts seeming boring, and then you start hankering after iPhone 51. It's like the scented rushes. They seem good only as long as you haven't booked it or bought it, let's say. Yeah, and then the Lion and the Unicorn. The Lion and the Unicorn, of course, come from the British coat of arms, which was made after the union of England and Scotland. And this, the fight of the Lion and the Unicorn is also a very trivial fight. I mean, fighting about trivial matters. They fight because of the size of the cake. They are not satisfied about the size of the cake they are being given. It's so stupid. It also somewhat shows the power conflicts between political leaders, let's say, during that period, meaningless conflicts over trivial issues, which even leaders of our times do very well. They keep on fighting about very trivial matters, like the Lion and the Unicorn. So the Lion and the Unicorn is as true during the Victorian period as it is now, let's say. Powerful people have this habit of quarreling about trivial matters. And it is during this portion that you find the Victorian prison conditions being referred to. You see the Hatter turning up. He is, of course, pronounced Hatta in this the Looking Glass portion, but he is actually the Mad Hatter. If you look at Tenniel's illustration in the original book, you will find it's the Hatter, the prisoner, and Carroll writes a line or two about the terrible prison conditions in Looking Glass Land, which is, of course, the prison conditions in Victorian society itself. Prison conditions were terrible. I mean, this is one reason why the Newgate novel sold so much, because you have real life criminals talking about the terrible prison conditions they were living in. Because they were terrible, people like to read those accounts. Middle class people will read them secretly and feel a kind of guilty pleasure. The kind of things which happen in those prisons will send cold shivers down the middle class's spines, let's say. And then you have Humpty Dumpty. Of course, he's so condescending. Humpty Dumpty is like the rose and the tiger lily. I mean, this is where you find perhaps the Looking Glass getting too dense. Carroll is using multiple figures to prove the same point. You have the rose and the tiger lily, and you again have Humpty Dumpty, who represent the working class, the upper classes, because Humpty Dumpty is also so condescending, right? And he looks so ridiculous because of his self-importance. And when Alice cannot differentiate between his cravat and his belt, he gets so offended. He always gets offended. He always feels so opomanito. Well, I didn't say that. He is so self-important, just like the upper classes. And then you have the White Knight. The White Knight, the favorite thing which the White Knight is always fond of saying is that this is my own invention. And this habit of his saying this is my own invention, as he's inventing a lot of things, it actually refers to the obsession about science. The Victorian period was very much obsessive about science. There was that British Association for Advancement of Sciences, which came out during this period. There were those yearly conventions of BAAS, which were done to educate the rural people about scientific matters. The yearly conventions of the British Association was held in counties precisely to educate rural people about science. There were a lot of journals which came out in very easy language to educate the common people, and the common people were also taking a lot of interest in scientific matters. Unlike the 18th century, in the 18th century, science was very much an upper class affair. The Royal Society was very much an upper class affair. Not so in 19th century. The Victorian period is the time when science was getting democratized in England. Everyone was taking an interest in inventions. The common people, let's say, were almost obsessed about new inventions. And there were so many things invented during this period, right? There was a telegraph, there was a telephone, there was a gas light, there was a penny post, photography, cinematography. Then there was, of course, the computer, which was also getting invented during the Victorian period, Charles Babbage. So it is this obsession with invention which is being shown here through the White Knight. Of course, it's a bit comical because the White Knight, he invents things which are generally of no practical use, and he has invented so many things, but he has not invented a way to keep himself from falling from the horse. He tumbles out from the horse almost every second. But in spite of being, I mean, this of course mocks the, let's say, the forgetful nature of the scientists, of the inventors, let's say. But in spite of that, you will see that the White Knight is perhaps the most likable character in the whole novel. He is a good man. He may be a bit comical, he may be a bit forgetful, but he is a good man, and it's pretty obvious. Carroll's vote being on the side of the man of science, because Carroll himself was a man of science, right? He was a logician, he was a mathematician. So it is very natural that he will show the scientist, the White Knight figure, in a favorable light. And then finally you have Alice becoming queen, and this is the stage where she is asserting her own identity. There is always a streak in Alice which is trying to express herself. I mean, this is where Through the Looking Glass becomes a feminist novel, of course, in that sense. Because in spite of getting dominated by all these people around her, Alice is always trying to express herself. Alice is always trying to break free, let's say. And that is why she always keeps on saying, I want to be queen. That is actually her journey in this book. She travels from one square to another in the chessboard, and she tries to reach that ultimate square where she can become queen, because she has understood that is the only way she can express herself, by becoming queen. But what does she actually find by becoming queen? By becoming queen, she becomes a part of the royal coterie, let's say. But does she like it? No. She finds that the royal court is very dominating. It's full of people who are rude and filled with false etiquette, because she finds that this is a place where you need to introduce yourself to food items. Alice, mutton, Alice. And then she needs to introduce herself to the pudding. And by the time she comes before the pudding, she is almost adamant. She's like, I will not introduce myself to another food item. This is ridiculous. But of course, no one pays any heed to her. There is that that red queen who is very dominating. So she goes on again. Pudding, Alice, pudding. This is very ridiculous. It actually, let's say, ridicules the upper classes' obsession with etiquette, and the upper classes are actually shown as lost in their own world. They do not worry about anything except their false etiquette and their immediate surrounding. Of course, he is talking about the Victorian upper classes here, the Victorian royal family, let's say. And finally, the royal court, you find that for all its etiquette and emphasis on discipline, it's a pretty chaotic place, because it is a place where all the tableware and the candles ultimately go flying. And this is where Alice decides that, well, enough is enough. And then she shouts out saying, you are not real. And this is a very significant part where she actually openly expresses her indignation, her disillusionment with the Royal Society. And that is what completely freaks out the others. And the others are like, oh, she actually said it. And this is, of course, the strongest moment of self-assertion for her. She says that I don't like these people. Royalty sucks, period. That's a pretty brave thing to say for a girl of, let's say, 7.5 years. And it is this precise moment where she expresses her individuality that her dream breaks, because she has, let's say, taken the remote in her own hands. She will not be played by anymore. She will not be directed by others. And the Red Queen, the fearful dominating Red Queen, it again transforms into the harmless kitten. The spell breaks. She has changed the rules of the game. Let's say she has broken the dream. She has encroached upon the story. She has taken the remote of the story in her own hand. She has said that, okay, I am writing the story now. And that is precisely when the dream breaks. She comes back. She is jolted back to reality. She has proved her individuality by expressing herself, refusing to get bowed down by all the intimidation. And this is where she has also done something else. She has actually proved true the Jabberwocky poem, but not as it was mentioned in the original version. Take a look at the Jabberwocky poem. What is it? It is a poem about slaying a monster. And who is slaying the monster? A male figure. Just according to Victorian rules of patriarchy, it is a male who is wielding a sword, and the sword is also a very important phallic symbol, right? He is wielding the sword and killing the monster, the terrible Jabberwocky. But here, the person who is killing the Jabberwocky is actually Alice himself, because who is the Jabberwocky? The Jabberwocky is this monster of the adult world, the male dominated Victorian adult society, let's say, which always tries to dominate her, which seems very dangerous. But you only need to express yourself. You only need to find your own footing, your own voice. And Carol seems to say here that if you only find your own voice, if you only shout out, lash out, the thing which seems dangerous, it will eventually become something ridiculous. Of course, they were seeming ridiculous enough throughout the whole book. If all the figures, they somewhat represent the Victorian adult society, as I have discussed so far, they always seem ridiculous as well. Humpty Dumpty is of course ridiculous. The Red Queen with all her dominating personality is of course a little bit ridiculous. But by the time Alice, the very moment when she breaks out, when she expresses herself, the dream actually dissolves, and the thing, the fear, the monster becomes absolutely nothing. And that is the same way Tenniel has drawn the Jabberwocky also, right? If you take a look at the illustration, if you take a look at the illustration of the Jabberwocky, you will see that the Jabberwocky is dangerous, but it's also somewhat ridiculous. Tenniel has been very careful to draw the monster in a way that its legs and talons and let's say wings and tails, they give it a very Godzilla like a dinosaur like appearance. But if you see its face, the face is that of an old man, a comical old man. It's not very dangerous. It seems somewhat like a sad old man. And see the figure which is killing the Jabberwocky. Tenniel has been very smart in drawing it. You see it has long hair. So maybe it's a female figure. He has done something very revolutionary through the illustration. Though the poem is actually a male figure killing the Jabberwocky, Tenniel has drawn a female figure killing the Jabberwocky, because that is what the book itself shows. We see Alice killing the monster named the Victorian Adult Society. Not a male figure, but a female figure who is appropriating the, let's say, the male weapon, the traditional male weapon, the sword. So that's it. And to end, let's say, it can be said that Through the Looking Glass shows a child holding her own against a dominating, class-ridden Victorian adult society, where the adults are ultimately rendered ridiculous and the child has the last word, the final say. Because when the story ends, we find Alice wondering who actually dreamt the dream. He says, did the Red King dream it, or did I myself dream it? We know, right? We know that perhaps it was the Red King dreaming during the beginning, when Alice did not have the remote in her own hands. But from the very moment when she started expressing herself, the dream became her own. She owned it. She encroached upon that traditionally male Victorian adult dream, let's say. And it is she who had the final word before the dream ultimately breaks down. So yeah, that's about it. I'm done. Thank you all for bearing with me for so long.
Thank you very much, sir. for such a rich and resourceful lecture. Actually, I couldn't miss a single word of your lecture. I was always there. And I hope this lecture will be highly beneficial and very profitable for our students who are waiting here, or who are waiting for dropping their questions. And I admire the entire lecture. And actually, this what your lecture bears is the spirit of intertextuality that I should comment. That you brought in the different texts, for starting from Frankenstein, Jane Eyre, Songs of Innocence and Experience, Oliver Twist, and many others, and different authors as well. And I should also say the issues of racism, Orientalism, and anti-hegemonic and anti-patriarchal ideas are really thought-provoking, and that will help our students to be really to improve their ideas also. And what I should admire most, actually your entire lecture is very admiring, and what I should admire is that this is really very the connection with the present socio-political situation, which makes the lecture very relevant to the to our current situation. That is really very admirable, I should say. So, I'd like to take your permission that there are many questions from our students. So, may I ask them? Okay, sir. So, okay, sir. With your permission, I am taking some the questions posted here. I would like to take the first question of Shukanto Barman. The question is, would it be right to say that Alice in the Wonderland shows us spiritual decadence amidst material prosperity? If so, has any kind of solution been worked out in the novel? And what do women stand in such crises when the Victorian time boasts of so many progressive things? And Shukanta Barman has another question in this connection. Also, in connection with your iPhone analogy, please comment on the role of consumerism a little elaborated in the novel. This is the question.
Yeah, I mean, spiritual decadence, it can be said, because, I mean, in the whole book, we see, look at the Looking Glass, the people are quite rude, and all those ideas about, I mean, the traditional ideas about Christian humility and stuff. If there is anything which the people in the Looking Glass land are not, it's that they are not humble at all. I mean, when they are not humble, they are not tender, they are very unchristian, let's say. I mean, the way they treat Alice, it's not what a Christian will do, right? So it was perhaps Carol's way of saying that, are we really as Christian as we think ourselves to be in our real lives? So yeah, so much about spiritual decadence and solution. I would not say that he has actually provided a solution. I mean, as we know that Carroll was not, I mean, he did not provide neat conclusions and solutions in his works. That was perhaps something which Dickens was more fond of doing. But what he has actually finished the novel with is a kind of individual expression. Alice, I mean, he fails to be bowed down by all those intimidating figures, and she is trying to break out. But again, what I would like to add here is that the fact remains that she can only express herself by dreaming. And why is she, I mean, being made to dream over and over, both in Alice in Wonderland and through the Looking Glass? It's perhaps because in dream she can express herself in ways that reality denies herself too. And Carroll himself was, of course, very obsessed with this idea of children getting old and becoming and losing this kind of rebellious quality about them. So if you read, there is a poem attached to the end of the novel, and if you read the poem, you'll find that the main idea of the poem is precisely this: that childhood is a transient period. In childhood, it is possible to have a rebellious quality in you, to express yourself more openly, which Alice is doing at the end of the novel, precisely because he's a child, but which is a fleeting one. By the time childhood ends, and it is all too soon, the adult loses that rebellious quality in him. or her. The societal pressure, the peer pressure becomes too much for the adult, and it actually bows the child down, and the magical quality, the rebellious quality of the child, which makes it so special, is gone. It's a kind of anxiety which Carol seemed to have been suffering from. It's obvious from that, or it's all the more obvious from the poem which he wrote at the end of the novel. And solution does not seem to be coming, because all he has to offer here is a dream, let's say. And I might add here is that there is another Victorian writer about childhood who was also very much anxious about this idea of the child becoming an adult also soon, and the writer is J.M. Barrie. In his Peter Pan, Wendy is also somewhat similar to Alice, because Wendy is a small child and she grows into an old woman. And in the Peter Pan, the novel version itself, Wendy is shown to be inspired by Peter. I mean, what is so special about Peter is precisely that he does not grow old. Somehow, magically, he has escaped the curse of aging. Peter is this popular fantasy, but alas, he is a fantasy after all, because at the end of the novel version of Peter Pan, the novelized version, it is being made very clear by Barrie that Wendy ultimately grew old, unlike Peter, because unlike Peter, Wendy is a flesh and blood character, and all she had were memories of her adventures with Peter Pan. She could only tell them as fireside stories to her children and grandchildren, and derive perhaps a momentary respite. But growing old is ultimately inevitable. It is something which you cannot escape, let's say. And it's the same anxiety which has been shown in that book, that film as well, The Finding Neverland. That Johnny Depp tells that child that, well, you have grown old, which is perhaps good, but that magical child in you is gone. So yeah, there was always this kind of an anxiety. More than the solution, the anxiety seems to be pervading. And as to the consumerist portion, well, there is a lot of material culture in the Looking Glass as well, because people here also are a bit obsessed with things. They seem to, in addition to the scented grass episode, of course, the scented grass episode shows the fact that material acquisitions have this habit of losing their charm as soon as you acquire them. As soon as you get the scented grass, Alice sees its charm fading away. And the same happens with our material acquisitions. What I said about those iPhone and all, as soon as you lay your hands to the latest model, you see that there is another latest model coming, and you start hankering after that. Then there is another angle present here where in that episode where Alice is being coaxed to address a food item. Now, a food item is something which is something very material, right? The mutton, the pudding, they are actually material things. And the problem with the people in Looking Glass land seems to be precisely this. They do not essentially know the difference between living and non-living stuff. Alice thinks that addressing a piece of mutton is ridiculous because it's non-living, but that is precisely what the people in Looking Glass land have forgotten. Why? Perhaps because of this material obsession. I mean, that is what happens with children of our generation, right? We see our kids getting lost in social media and, let's say, in various playstations and gadgets, and not paying attention to the real relatives moving around them. So it's precisely what happens with them. They lose the balance between living and non-living. They lose the balance between, let's say, the real and the simulated. To say in the words of Baudrillard, they seem to think that the simulated, the artificial, is more real than the real itself. It comes from material obsession. So yeah. That is being shown in the novel The Looking Glass as well.
Thank you, sir, for such wonderful elaboration of the question. The next question is from Nandita Malakar. Nandita is from Chakdaha College. Her question is, sir, please repeat the name of the person who innovated the idea that a child's nature depends on what kind of education is given.
He did not actually innovate the idea, but yeah, William Godwin's book, William Godwin, the father of Mary Shelley and the father-in-law of P.B. Shelley and the husband of Mary Wollstonecraft. William Godwin was the one whose tract on education, it emphasized this idea that educating a child is very important, because since the child knows nothing, absolutely nothing, he is completely dependent on the things you educate the child with, the things you teach the child, and that is precisely what he or she will learn. And that is why education is so much important in Godwin's daughter's novel, right, Frankenstein. The problem with the let's say all the characters, I mean, that is of course another story. If I start elaborating on it, it will become a 1 hour lecture. But let's say the problem with each of the characters, Robert Walton, Victor Frankenstein, and the monster, it's that because they have not been educated properly in one way or another. Robert Walton has not had traditional education. He has completely been educated on his own whims. The Victor Frankenstein, of course, he was educated very well, but there was one blunder which his dad did. He did not, he just threw away the book of the pseudoscience alchemy from him without explaining why alchemy should not be read. And that began Victor's obsession with alchemy. So that was a very stupid thing to do, being a father. And then, of course, a monster who did not have any traditional education, let's say, because he did not have any parental guidance. He was kind of an orphan. So yeah, that's it. It's William Godwin.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Sir, Nondita has another question. Sir, as we are seeing that in this novella, the burning problems of society are presented allegorically, but generally children are too young to understand all these problems. So can we say that, like Lewis Carroll, the writers of this genre actually wanted to avoid the anger of their rivals publishing their writings as children literature?
Come again, I couldn't follow the question. The second part went a bit hazy.
So can we say that, like Lewis Carroll, the writers of this genre actually wanted to avoid the anger of their rivals publishing their writings as children's literature?
Yeah, it's actually a very good question. Yeah, right. Because this happens almost all the times, right? This is the thing why, I always believe the children's literature and popular literature, let's say, it's such an exciting genre. Precisely, children's literature it can present very serious issues in a playful, let's say, covering. Because children's literature, its very underestimation is a kind of strength. People generally don't read children's literature with seriousness, the people in power. And as our experience has taught us, the people in power are generally not the smartest people around. So they very often do not pay enough attention to works of children's literature. And that actually gives the writers of children's literature an advantage. They can talk about very controversial themes and topics which otherwise would have become very problematic if they were writing these about these in adult writings, let's say. You can to give examples, let's say you have seen a lot of writers getting banned while writing about homosexuality and such stuff in adult literature. But if you see John Roddenberry's Star Trek, which became very popular from the 1960s. The Star Trek and X-Men, Stan Lee's X-Men, they are actually talking about this precise issue. The problem of identity politics, the problem of otherizing people, the problem of treating different people as dangerous. Why are mutants treated as dangerous? Precisely because they are other, they are different. And that is what the X-Men always try to say. They always try to say that please try to understand we are not dangerous. In the film X-Men, Halle Berry, Storm, she tells the Senator, we don't bite. Why do you fear us? So it's almost the otherized, the marginalized people voicing their opinion that homosexuals do not bite, lesbians do not bite, queer people, let's say people of mixed race, we are not dangerous. Why otherize us? Please include us in the mainstream. Because differentiating us as marginalized people is actually very insulting, because we are not different. It's only you who have made us different. And I mean, Cannell himself has shown it a bit in that forest episode, right? In that Alice and the Deer. As long as we don't know each other, I mean, as long as we don't know that we are different, we don't come with preconceived ideas, it's very easy to make friends with people. I mean, think about the time when the people of the X-Men's own family turned against them, precisely from the period they learned that their child is a mutant. It's just those marks. When wings start coming out of their bodies, claws start developing, they start changing color. It is a preconceived idea which their parents have of the human, and it is this idea of the human which is forcing them to treat their child as something abnormal. It is not something which is coming from the inside. The child itself does not start behaving like an alien. The child is still an innocent child. But the parent cannot assimilate, or let's say swallow, that this different element, let's say, and that is why the parent ran away from the child, and the X-Men or the young mutant is left with no other option but to go to Charles Xavier's orphanage. So it's the kind of the same thing which is happening here. As long as you do not know that it's a deer, it's a different thing, as long as it does not clash with your idea of the normal, the self and the other, it's very easy to make friends with anybody, because differences are only in our mind. And it is precisely this reason why children's literature is such a strong thing. I mean, you see the Disney movies, they are all talking about very important issues. Moana is talking about tribal culture. Coco is talking about mixed race origins, the Latinos. But the advantage is precisely this: they can all talk about these materials while not getting too problematic, because we have this idea that Disney is kid stuff. So we don't really think Disney in such terms. Of course, there are smart people who know what is happening, but generally, if you say even something offensively revolutionary through a children's book, it will generally not land you in prison, like, say, writing something like Lady Chatterley's Lover will. It's of course less dangerous. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, sir, for such wonderful connection that you always make. Sir, our next question is from Onik Mondol. His question is, sir, will you please tell once again about the origin of the idea of innocence?
Yeah, the origin of the idea of innocence. During the medieval period, there was this, I mean, I have elaborated it. This time I will shorten it a bit because I'm taking up a lot of time. In the medieval period, there was this idea that the child is not actually an innocent one. The child is pretty evil because it carries that seed of the original sin. The original sin which our common father and mother, according to Christianity, Adam and Eve committed. The sin of having the fruit eaten from the tree of knowledge. So the child was believed to carry that seed of that sin within itself. And as a result, people believe that the child always needs to be treated with a heavy hand. Otherwise, the child can turn bad. It can turn evil, because there is always this inborn tendency to turn evil because of that seed of original sin. Then came John Locke's that essay on human understanding in the Enlightenment period. And he said something very revolutionary. And it was that when a child is born, when a human being is born, the human being's mind is absolutely blank. It's a tabula rasa, a clean slate. Tabula rasa is, of course, Latin. Now, the thing is, if you start believing that the human's mind is a clean slate when the human is born, it follows that it can never have the sin of original sin in its mind, right? If your mind has nothing, how can it have the seed of original sin in it? So then started this idea of treating the child as something absolutely blank, pure, innocent. Think about the idea of innocence. What do we generally associate innocence with? Ignorance. Because what is the most popular thing we say about innocence? Are wo to eto innocent kichu jane na. This idea of innocence is inescapable with the idea of ignorance. The one who knows cannot be innocent. The one who does not know anything is innocent. So that is why the idea came that if the child knows nothing, like Jon Snow in Game of Thrones, the child is of course an innocent one. And then you have this idea of the innocent child getting popularized in contemporary literature as well. The child as a pure one, the child as an innocent one. Sometimes they overdo things, these writers. For example, I mean, you have William Blake and William Wordsworth. After the Enlightenment, they were writing works which show the child in such a light. Blake's Age of Songs of Innocence, Wordsworth's Immortality Ode. But you also have Charles Dickens, who sometimes goes a bit too far while portraying the child as innocent. He starts portraying it unrealistically innocent. I mean, people like Oliver Twist and David Copperfield, and even that guy, that Pip, he just goes on believing that Havisham is paying him all that money. All the readers have understood that the money has not come from Havisham. But Pip, the idiot, still keeps on believing that Havisham is giving him money. He's so innocent, so stupid, let's say, so dumb. So yeah, that's all about the innocent child, the idea of innocence and all.
Thank you very much, sir. There are many questions in the chat box, but I'm sorry to say that we can't take all the questions. So I will take two more questions from the chat box. One is from Shagor Bishwas from Pritilata Wadedar Mahavidyalaya. The question is, sir, does the chess playing symbolize the modern political society?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, because the chess playing, the very game is derived from the idea of the battlefield, right? So I would say that not the modern political, I mean, since we are talking about Victorian society here, let's talk about Victorian things a bit at first. I would not say that it symbolized just the Victorian political scenario, but the Victorian society itself. Because the Victorian society during that, at least during the 1830s and 40s, it was very much in a state of flux. People were running for more and more power because a lot of new things were happening during that time. The empire was making its presence felt in almost every corner of the world. A lot of new things were pouring in. There were a lot of jobs available, because there were a lot of people who needed to go to the colonies and mind business there. So there were a lot of posts available in the colonies. So a lot of Englishmen were running after those jobs. The power struggle was almost overwhelming during that period. Suddenly, it seemed that the importance of the Englishman has grown manifold in the world, let's say. At every corner of the world, you find an English colony. And obviously, in an English colony, you find English posts, right? Posts for Englishmen. And as a result, obviously, there is a lot of power struggle, because there is a lot of power to be had. Simply the increase in the amount of power the Englishman had during the Victorian period increased by leaps and bounds. And as a result, increased the power struggle manifold. And it is this power struggle which has perhaps led Lewis Carroll to show the Victorian society in terms of a chessboard. Of course, it is the political struggle, because everything is political. That's something which I believe very, very much. The colony is, of course, a very political thing. If you want to have a job in the colony, you, of course, have to have a hand in the political scenario, right? Because if you are a nobody, nobody is giving you a job anyway. That's as true. Perhaps that's as true in the Victorian society as it is true in our own world. And yeah, as coming to the modern political scenario, of course, yeah, the chessboard signifies the power struggle, because power struggle is something which only increases. It never decreases. You come to the Elizabethan, and it's also something very constant. You find it in the medieval period, Game of Thrones. You find it in the Elizabethan period, Shakespearean plays. You find it in the Victorian period, the power struggles in, let's say, Charles Dickens's novels. There is a lot of power struggle there. You find it in Through the Looking Glass. You find it in the modern novels. You find it in today's films. Power is something which has always, fascinated a lot of people. So yeah, power struggle never stops, and nor does the playing of chess. So the analogy remains. And that is why maybe the chessboard, it makes its presence felt again and again. In the first Harry Potter movie, there is a chessboard sequence. What happens in Hogwarts? It's also a power struggle. The struggle between Voldemort and Harry, and let's say Dumbledore, right? Harry Potter is also about power. So you have that analogy of the chessboard there as well. So yeah, I'm done. Uh,
Thank you very much, sir. So, since we have no more time, so I am taking the last question from the chat box. Actually, this was such a wonderful lecture that many questions are pouring in, and many of our students are also posting their questions. But I really apologize from the department that we cannot take all the questions. I am taking the last question from Rumela Shaha. The question is, sir, can we say that in this novel, Carol is trying to reclaim the importance of children and animals alike, those who have been deprived of human agency during the anthropocentric Victorian era? This
yeah,
is the
it's a very, very good question. Of course, because the Victorian era, we know it was a very anthropocentric one. And if you look at Victorian colonialism, perhaps the matter becomes all the more, let's say, obvious. When the Victorian Englishmen, they were going into the colonies, they were trying to prove their power all the more by exerting their power on animals. And that is why hunting in the colonies becomes such a favored pastime of the Englishmen, in the Africas, in India, of course. And children's literature is a genre which I have always felt it has stressed on this importance of animals, the need to recognize the importance of animals. Yeah, of course, Carol has put the animals here. Of course, they are anthropomorphized. They have human characteristics, but the fact itself that we see here animals talking with Alice, who is a human, and engaging with her on an equal basis, it's a pretty revolutionary thing to do. And this is something which children's literature writers have always done. You think about Edith Nesbit. You think about Where the Wild Things Are. You think about Winnie the Pooh, Alexander Arthur Milne. Then you think about that woman, Enid Blyton. Yeah, all her figures, all her detective figures, Fatty and the other four, the Secret Seven, the famous five, they all have a non-human presence. They all have a pet dog. And Enid Blyton, of course, has written a lot of animal stories. Then there is Anna Sewell's Black Beauty, about that black horse. So yeah, children's literature has over and over, it has tried to emphasize the importance of the non-human. And you find the children's literature writers of our country doing the same thing again. You have Budo Angla, where you have those swans, those talking swans. And well, I can go on adding. You have the talking monkey in Kire Putul. The list is just too big. So yeah, absolutely right. There is this angle. True.
Okay, sir. Thanks a lot, sir, for such wonderful answers of the questions. So I again apologize that I cannot take all the questions. There are many more questions here. So so thank you very much for this lecture and for the answers that you delivered, and for the connections, numerous connections that you made with the real life, with the present socio-political situations and others. So thank you very much. So finally, I'd like to invite our HOD ma'am, Madhumita Das, to say a few words.
Before ma'am makes a very formal closure, I want to just personally thank sir for making so much of, so much of reference, for giving so much of references from popular culture, multimedia cultures. Actually, I was listening with rapt attention. It's not just engaging. It was extremely enjoyable, and I personally believe education must be enjoyed. So thank you, sir. I really wanted to express a gratitude. So thank you again. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And yeah, thank you as well.
Okay,
Yes,
Madhumita.
Okay, I now hand over to Madhumita ma'am.
Okay, first of all, what I want to say to Dr. Bhattacharya, words fail to appreciate your deliberation. Literally, I was taking running notes. Maybe some others too were, I'm not talking about the students. There are other faculties too, not only from my college, but other colleges also. So I think saying thanks is too inadequate, and it will be formal too. So I would rather express my heartfelt gratitude to you, Dr. Bhattacharya.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. I also want to thank Professor Shukanto Bormon from Islampur College, who just now wrote to me that he was running out of his net charge. That is why he had to leave. So thank you very much, Professor Borman. And last but not the least, all my thanks should be accredited to Professor Shumon Banerjee, Assistant Professor of Krishnanagar Government College, who it was to mention Dr. Bhattacharya.
He was the one.
So really, Shumon, I am proud of you. I am proud of your friend too, Dr. Bhattacharya. It was mind-blowing.
He was my school senior as well. I read in the same school as him. I was just 2 years junior.
Yeah, I know. I learned a lot from you. And the students
Thank
also.
you, man. Thank you, man. It's really humbling. It's really humbling to be coming from someone like you.
No, frankly speaking, and I am always up to learning anything and everything from anyone, be it my junior or senior. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So, may I now close the session by delivering the vote of thanks?
Yes.
Okay, ma'am. So finally, I'd like to thank all the participants who are present here, especially the chief guest and also our faculty members. And at last, I'd like to thank our principal madam, Dr. Swagata Das Mahanta, IQAC coordinator, Dr. Arun Kumar Nandi, resource person, that is obviously Dr. Bipranarayan Bhattacharya, the participants, the colleagues from other institutions, university, college, schools, etc. And also our teaching and office fraternity, students of our college and neighboring institutions, our technical advisor, Dr. Anirban Banerjee, technical assistant of our college, Mr. Anip Roy, who helped the department by sharing the post on Facebook, Mr. Vishwadeep Roy, who gave us technical advice. So this was the vote of thanks to all the people. So ma'am, this is towards the closure of our session. So with this vote of thanks, I would like to close our session. Thank you very much.
Momita, another word.
Yes, ma'am.
We won't leave Dr. Bhattacharya. So
okay,
we hope to,
of course, ma'am.
Listen to him further also.
Okay, of course, ma'am. Of course, ma'am.
Yes. When we will see,
we will invite him in another.
After this pandemic is over.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Of course.
I will be happy to join you all. It will be another great opportunity for me. Of course, I'm open anytime.
And when the students will be physically able to attend the seminar, and at that time you will be probably you will also join our lecture series.
Of course. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. So now we need to close this session.
Thank you all.
So yes. Thank you. So
thank you all. Good night.